We're fortunate enough, and we really thank them for coming over, and glad that the weather cooperated. So we have Dylan Fernandes and Julian Sear, our state representative, and our state senator. And your legs good.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Let's go. Take one. Thanks.
Nice to see you, Julian.
Nice to see you.
Yes.
Let's see, right?
No, I know. Good? Yeah. Good to see you, Jim. So I just wanted to, I guess, maybe, start with one of you, whoever wants to start, to, highlight what you want us to hear, and anything you think is important that, for us on the island. For you guys, it's old hat, but I'm on a committee in Boston. I got an hour with the Senate President 2 days ago, so that was pretty awesome, and she's pretty cool. I really enjoyed the time. She appeared to really listen. There were about 7 or 8 people from different towns, so it was, and we talked a lot about housing and zoning.
Yep.
So anyway, whichever one of you want to start would be great, and then we'll have a period for questions also afterwards. So
I think what we'll do is we'll start with Julian to talk about wastewater issues, and then I'll talk about some other things, dredging, housing, kind of funding issues, and the like.
And we can come back to some of the,
and
some
obviously
updates on some of the solutions on transportation, climate change, and there's a lot of conversation on that. So what I wanted to talk to the Island Select Board about tonight is something that the Cape and Islands delegation has been working diligently on for the past year. Some of you are aware of this proposal. We actually had a meeting on Island was it last week or the week before last? It was last week. So with a lot of folks that were there. Gail and Tristan were in attendance, some folks in the audience as well at the MD Commission, and really looking at the challenge that we face across the region. So I represent not only all of Martha's Vineyard and also Nantucket, but almost all of the Cape, so Mashpee out to Provincetown. And what almost every single town that I represent has a challenge with water quality as it relates to nitrogen loading in our embayments, the fact that due to the scale and some other factors in our communities didn't broadly make these investments in sewering and other investments when there was a lot of state and federal resources for that. And so we've been working to figure out how we're going to come up with resources from the state to help our towns. And there's been a whole focus on the Cape about this, a whole conversation on it. And one thing I felt really strongly about was I know that many of the communities on island, particularly the 3 down island towns, face many of the same challenges as it relates to high levels of nitrogen in your embayments, also levels of phosphorus in freshwater ponds. I'd actually argue island towns are ahead of some Cape towns. But as we're beginning to craft a solution to bring state resources to help out the Cape, I've really felt, and Dylan's really felt, that we need to do our due diligence and make sure that island communities have an opportunity at this as well. I do not want to be in a situation where 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, if I'm in this seat or whoever's in this position, and island communities are asking, well, hey, we actually have a similar problem. Why didn't, what about us? Why were we left out? And so what we've worked on is a proposal to create a Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund. And so this is a fund that will be dedicated in response to the steep price tag that we have in billions of dollars across our communities for removing excess nitrogen. It is intended to help meet the Commonwealth's financial obligation to what is known as the 208 Plan. The Conservation Law Foundation sued US EPA in 2011 for degraded nitrogen levels in the Cape towns. The lawsuit basically was settled with an agreement by US EPA, Mass DEP, Cape communities, and signed by Governor Baker in 2015 to create a roadmap, a 208 plan to clean up excess nitrogen in the plan. We have a $4 billion problem on Cape Cod, and the state is committed to fund $1 billion of that. There's been a lot of thought, where are we going to get $1 billion from the state from an appropriations perspective? That's a pretty heavy lift. And so, one way or another, funding must be secured to address wastewater both in traditional pipes and pumps as well as alternative methods. Doing nothing for communities on the Cape is not an option given the court action, and doing nothing, I think, is not an option as well, especially for Down Island communities and for Nantucket. So the idea is that you create a Cape and Islands water protection trust that is built within, or that is a subset of the existing state revolving loan fund that is housed within the Treasurer's office and advised by Mass DEP, so that you create this trust where it's essentially supplemental to revenues that the state already puts into the state revolving loan fund. It's a fund that uses the existing selection criteria, and there's a whole FAQ here that I've handed out that I'm glad to walk folks through with questions. The idea is that we would have this Clean Water Trust as sort of this bucket, a subset of the broader statewide SRF fund. It is additive, right? So the state can't say, oh, these are monies that are, we're going to use these monies for the Cape, or we're going to use these monies for Martha's Vineyard, and not SRF funds. And then those projects would receive approval from a management board that has every participating town in the fund would have a seat on that board, so it's one town, one vote, not based on population.
So just on that point, the Vineyard would actually be overrepresented on this board. You guys would have 6 votes. The Cape, 1 county, 6 votes. The Cape, it's only 1 town. No matter how big you are, Barnstable gets the same vote that Provincetown gets. That gets the same vote as Aquina gets. And so you guys have 6 towns. So you'd have, regionally, the Vineyard would have the most representation on the board.
Yeah. The sort of projects that will be funded, yes, traditional pipes and pumps, but it also, the language also includes innovative technologies and other approaches like aquaculture, dredging, things that we haven't anticipated. It also allows monies to be used for Title V upgrades and alternative septic technologies. This is really important for up-island communities, or for communities like where I'm from in Truro. Unlikely that we're going to have a significant sewering in Truro. It's just too rural. Maybe on this little beach road, this shore road section that we have going into Provincetown. And so it's also a source for towns to use for design as well. So one of the challenges that communities that have put aside money for wastewater run into is that they have money set aside for the actual construction, but they can't get money put aside for actually the design and the planning and engineering. What else is on here? There's a mechanism that sets aside resources to look at comprehensive water monitoring. So if you don't have data looking at what's happening in embayments, particularly with these alternative technologies, you can't justify that to regulators. For municipalities that currently don't have a 208 plan, we use we try to figure out, how do you create a trust? How do you create something that the legislature has a penchant for sticking our fingers into pots of money that we set aside for various resources. And so how do we basically create a mechanism where it's really hard for us, 5, 10, 20 years down the road, sort of stick our sticky fingers in and take resources that we've allocated for this specific problem in the region. So it's been designed, we've used this 208 criteria because it's something that's very unique to Cape Cod. What's different is that the island communities have not undergone a 208 process. You folks have been involved in and actually been ahead of the curve in some of the communities working with Mass DEP on wastewater management. So island communities would work with Mass DEP to basically get approval from Mass DEP to be considered part of having a 208 plan. This is frankly designed to distinguish and to sort of protect our resources from the rest of the state. So to have, to protect a community from a Westport or a Great Barrington from saying, hey, we want to use this money too. I've actually emailed and asked, put in a request for Mass DEP to outline what the process would be for island communities to come into this. I'm waiting to get a response on that, so more to come, Gail. I bet you'll have that question. We also acknowledge that, I represent 20 towns, there's 23 towns across the Cape and Islands. and not all communities are the same. Not all communities have these concerns or have these needs. I think of my own hometown as Truro. For Truro, we're not going to need a huge amount of wastewater investments. Brewster set aside a lot of land conservation, Sandwich, certainly Up Island communities here as well. And so there's actually a mechanism where if towns do not want to be part of this trust, they're able to opt out via a 2/3 vote at town meeting. And if they're actually able to opt out if they've been in the fund already, they just need to complete their financial obligations. Essentially this provides municipalities with sort of an option and an acknowledgement that it's hard to craft something that's going to fit every single town. We have towns as big as 44,000 in Barnstable, as small as Truro's 2,000, which is a metropolis compared to Aquinnah. But trying to kind of create something that's going to meet the needs of the region. The way that we're looking at funding this is through something that's you folks, I think, have been aware of for quite some time, that both our predecessors have been working on, which is expansion of room occupancy. Room occupancy currently in Massachusetts only applies to motels and hotels and licensed B&Bs. It doesn't apply to VRBOs, Airbnbs, or rentals for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. This is a significant amount of revenue that's left on our table for our communities. The Cape delegation has been pushing this for over a decade. In part due to the fact that other communities, primarily Boston, is also now seeing adverse effects based on the emergence of Airbnbs and VRBOs, how this is changing development. There is a push to get this done in the legislature. The Senate has actually voted 2 times to apply room occupancy to short-term rentals. The governor has a relatively modest proposal that he's put into 2 of his budgets, and the Speaker in the House is committed to get this done. So this is a train that's moving. From a revenue source, I felt it was really important that we don't dip into the existing local option that communities have. It's between 2 and up to 6%. That's a significant source of additional basically additional monies that are going to come back to your communities from local option. So we didn't want to kind of wanting to sort of keep that local option whole. The idea is that we would levy an additional 2.75% fee or tax on all rooms, so both existing motels and hotels and rentals, and that this would be used to fund, or in part, this Clean Water Trust. The Clean Water Trust actually is set up to absorb other resources, so if we appropriated other monies, they could go into the trust. If federal monies came down the pipeline, that could be a place where it could go in the trust. But essentially, the 2.75% allows us, it's a model that's based on what several municipalities, Boston, Worcester, and Springfield have used to fund their convention centers. So where there's a more regional need, this is a precedent that has, that we think is something that is palatable to our colleagues. Something that's likely not palatable to our colleagues is to give our communities the ability to have an additional 2.75% that just goes directly back to each community. That's something I think we've explored, and with our colleagues, we don't think we'd be able to get that done, because essentially it would be giving our communities a higher local option than what other communities have in the state, and would be seen as unfair. I think the other strength really in kind of putting, in using the existing state revolving loan fund programs, having this additive pot of money where you're putting all those resources in, you're really able to bond out on projects quite far in the future, and it's a significant source of revenue. It's a significant source. And so what I wanted to do tonight is to sort of present this broadly, to see what questions you folks have. This is very much a work in progress. We have been meeting with people, and actually from the meeting we had last week on Island, have made revisions to the trust based on feedback. This is something that, as I said earlier, we know that is not a fit for every single town. So if this is passed, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to get this done, one, it would mean a significant state contribution in reducing cost to property taxpayers. If wastewater systems need to be built and built on the backs of property taxpayers, you're talking about a significant increase in property taxes. Our colleague Sarah Peak in Provincetown is one of the communities that has made investments in wastewater. Her betterment is as much as her property taxes. in a region that has become profoundly unaffordable, and where so many folks are just trying to make ends meet here, whether they're living on a fixed income, whether, or they're just trying to make it by. That's really something that I worry about and I'm concerned about. There's also language in this trust that acknowledges the investments that communities have already made on the Cape, Provincetown, Chatham, Barnstable, and Falmouth. All have invested in some wastewater structures and systems. And here on island, the 3 down island towns, my understanding is, have made those investments as well, as is Nantucket. There's a mechanism for those towns to essentially refinance that debt and to use the trust in that way as well. So I think tonight, wanting to just make sure that you heard from me and from us about this proposal, that we're trying to, I think, one, make sure that island towns have a seat at the table and have an option to come into this. It's something that, if it's not a fit, if we pass this is something that would go into effect in sort of like 2020, 2019, 2020. So there'd be some time to actually really assess whether or not this is a fit for communities. But I really felt it was really important that we do, and I do my due diligence to make sure that the communities, the 6 communities that are represented here on island, have a shot at this, given the amount of short-term rentals that we have in our communities and how much they rent for, which is quite significant. This is a significant revenue source for wastewater, in addition to the significant increase of local options that will come. So glad to take questions. I know this is a lot of information.
What I'd like to do is have, if Dylan has some stuff he wants to say in part, and then we'll have questions on whatever, and just, there's cups there, I did make killer coffee, and there's hot water for tea, and there's cookies, so.
Thank you.
Whoever wants, but maybe I would just kind of make it, wrap it up. So Dylan, maybe you could, whatever you want to talk to us about, and then we'll take questions from you guys on whatever.
We wanted this to be the main point, but just to piggyback on Julian, Julian's worked really hard on this piece, and there were some folks on Cape that were skeptical about including the islands. I mean, I certainly wouldn't have supported it if it didn't include the islands, and Julian fought really hard to make sure both islands were included. And I mean, you guys have a huge wastewater infrastructure problem, and there's exorbitant costs associated with it. This is a way for those costs to be paid for by people who come in during the summertime, who use our roads, who flush our toilets, who, what have you, to help pay for those costs. And it's not on the back of the residents that you represent. So I think this is a really kind of innovative plan that Julian and the Cape delegations put forward. I'll just list a few points that I wanted to bring up. I'm part of a dredging working group at the State House. The state's going to announce sometime this month a 50-50 split, 50-50 match with towns on dredging. This is, I know, a really important piece for Tisbury in particular, but this is going to be a fund that is going to match with towns, 50-50 split, but also give funds for groups of towns that want to regionalize. And regionalize isn't just kind of Vineyard specific. If you guys wanted to go in with Falmouth and other towns and purchase a dredge, or maybe give some money to Art and the folks in Egerton to help share that dredge. There's a regional aspect to it as well if a bunch of communities want to come together and purchase a dredge. So if you want more information about that, contact our office. It's a brand new program. They're rolling it out this month, so hopefully by the end of the month we'll have good ideas on how you guys can apply to make sure you get those match funds. Other piece I want to talk about while we're on the funding piece, we met with the folks in OB, was that last week too? Last week too. So we,
Pre-storm, yeah.
Pre-storm. Everything's a pre or post storm now. Yeah. So we met with you guys about kind of applying for state grants, and OB and every town on island should reach out to us in terms of any state grant that you apply for. And even if you're applying to a federal grant, just let us know and we can either write a letter of support or also reach out to the congressional delegation to make sure they're writing a letter of support. Kaylee, my terrific island liaison, in the back, put together the numbers. And last year, it was $6.5 million in state grants that we helped you guys, that not only applied for, that you got, that we helped write letters of support for. So let us know, and I'm looking at OB in particular, let us know if you're putting in for something, and we're more than happy to write a letter of support, make a phone call, and the like. Other piece, housing, every single island town, I believe, at this point, voted for a kind of non-binding resolution on setting up a housing bank. But there hasn't been we haven't seen kind of a comprehensive island-wide effort on what that housing bank looks like. Obviously, the Vineyard is becoming, and probably is already, a profoundly unaffordable community. A lot of young people have to do the island shuffle every year, but we know that seniors also are having a really hard time finding housing. So you guys, I know, are aware of our efforts on Nantucket to advance a housing bank, and we think that, given the overwhelming support for it at town meetings and on the ballot across the state, across the island, that we should have some iteration of that for the Vineyard. So in the coming months, I think we're looking to schedule a housing bank forum where we hope to get people from all over the island. And we hope to facilitate that, maybe with the IHT and perhaps the United Way, maybe the Realtors Association and other, to come up with kind of a menu of options for what an affordable housing bank could look like on the island.
We need, for us to actually get something enacted and passed in the legislature, and this would be something that does have to go through the legislature, we need to kind of come up with the right language in what this thing would be. So it's nice to sort of say, okay, broadly, housing's an issue here. 5 of the 6 towns, this was on the ballot, it passed overwhelmingly. But what actually does this look like? And there's different opinions in the community here. I think, for Dylan and I to be able to move the ball forward on this, and this is something that we have prioritized, that we both ran on, that I think we represent from a literal generational perspective as well. And it's something that we've been working in our other towns. So in Provincetown, a lot of success with a year-round rental housing program, accessory dwelling unit bylaws. We've been organizing and making sure that these are pushed through a town meeting. I think we both feel a real desire to really help those efforts here. But I think there needs to be some consensus in what that is. And we've met with various stakeholders, since that vote, and there isn't a consensus yet on what that looks like and what that is. And I think what we're trying to do is to sort of bring some folks together of all sort of viewpoints, get everyone in the room and have a real conversation about everything that this possibly could be. Until to move to a place of consensus, until there's consensus, it's really hard for us to bring something to Beacon Hill. It's a lot easier, on Nantucket, where you have one island, one town, one county. You have a home rule petition, you're able to take that. Here we essentially need to kind of come up with what that home rule petition looks like, but across, one island and 6 communities. So I think the thought is if communities who voted for this want to move forward on this, we're going to need to find a way to kind of have some consensus. We're glad to help serve as conveners or facilitators, but it's really something that needs to come, from all of you and from the island, from the island community broadly. And it does mean, kind of more steps to get there. So that's sort of our thought in looking at, first in having conversations with a whole host of folks, and sort of realizing that there isn't consensus here on what this looks like, and then saying, all right, how do you keep that conversation going?
So I had a question on that, only because there might be some misunderstanding about that. I think that, first of all, everybody was kind of waiting and seeing what, is this going to pass in Nantucket, is Nantucket going to get this? We're I think you could find consensus around that concept, which is, if I'm not mistaken, similar to our land bank, where there's a fee on real estate transactions. And I think that if we could have something like that, I think that then the next step would be, okay, we know what the land bank does, what would the housing bank do? And that's something that's an internal discussion, we have to figure it out. But the funding source, I think you'd find consensus around the island for something like a,
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a couple, the wait and see. I mean, I think Nantucket has been filing an iteration of this for about 20 years, right? So
we've been
it's a long time. It's a long time to wait and see, right? And so I think what we're saying is, this we've been working incredibly hard on this home rule petition for Nantucket, and I won't get into the specifics of it, but yeah, it is a transaction fee. It's an additional transaction fee to the one they already have over there for their land bank. If we cannot, I think we're going to push really hard for it this year. If it doesn't go through, Nantucket's thinking about going back to the drawing board or coming up with some other iteration of it, just because they've been pushing for a housing bank for a very long time
So,
on that island.
I'm not understanding the difficulty in getting that passed. If the
So I-
community wants that?
Yep. So the reason why the transfer fees in particular have been difficult to get through is that off-island and off-Cape real estate interests in community broadly feel that that this is something that they don't want to see perpetrated. If you recall the history of, the land bank efforts that was successful on Nantucket, successful on Martha's Vineyard, and, essentially sort of stopped there, and it was stopped there in part because, and largely in part because of those interests, of Boston-based interests of not wanting to see that perpetrated. And part of the argument we're making on Nantucket is, oh, well, this is special and unique because Nantucket's so unaffordable, trying to sort of sneak this through. And so, so for instance, as we're sort of negotiating this, you could see, I could really see the broader real estate community saying, well, we don't want, we won't agree to an additional 2%. Maybe we'd agree to an additional 1%, but we want you to dip in, wanting to have a conversation about the land bank or those percentages. And that's something that, I think neither of us are prepared to do and can't, because there's no mechanism to have a home rule petition that unless there's a home rule petition that comes from every single of the 6 towns in a uniform way. It's hard from a legislative and negotiation perspective to really advance something that we know is going to sort of run into a brick wall of a real estate lobby that's going to say, no more transfer fees. You guys really care about this? I mean, they say, their argument is, you care about this should be levied in your property taxes then. And so, I mean, I don't agree with that, but I think that I want to be honest about the sort of forces that we're running up against, and I think that we may need to be more creative and more nimble
So basically
to
what
get
you're
some
saying
fast.
is the forces are external
Yes.
to what we want. So even though we want it, there's these external forces from other places that are preventing it?
Well, I mean, I suppose, one of the issues, we don't know what you guys want, because there hasn't been a comprehensive piece that the island has gotten behind that said, hey, and you said, hey, Julian, Dylan, this is what we
There's been a
want.
lot of discussion about it.
Mhm.
I think that you would find, and if need be, we can generate it for you, but I think you would find consensus around the idea of a housing bank, similar to land bank legislation.
Yep.
I think you'd find broad support on the island. I don't think you'd see too many people against it. And just the details of how the money is going to be handled and how it's dispersed and all that. If there had to be 6 towns, we could get 6 towns. Maybe we could do it through the county. I don't know, but
Yep.
but the idea is that I think that there is consensus. First of all, there's a crisis on the Vineyard as far as affordable housing is concerned. It's beyond crisis now. People don't even realize it. And we're going to have future needs, they're just coming down on us like this. We have a burgeoning elder population. There's going to be need for more service people for that segment of the community. There's going to be need for the senior citizens in addition to that. So we have the need, and what we don't have is some kind of funding mechanism. We've looked at a lot of different things, and they seem to sort of cannibalize what we already have. But the idea of some type of transfer fee, I don't know, like 0.5% or something like that, would go a long way to beginning to address the issue of affordable housing here.
Yeah, there's no question
absolutely.
that a transfer fee is a great tool at raising revenue.
It's annoying to
there's
hear
no-
that it's outside forces. People in Boston don't want us to have it, you know, what the
I mean,
hell?
essentially there's a real estate lobby that doesn't want to see any sort of transaction fee of any kind in any place in the state.
So
And
what
they're
we need-
willing to go to bat in any community that's going to advance some sort of transfer fee, not just our community, any community in the state, so that if they get that fee, it doesn't spread to other places like it did with the land bank. So, you know, the Nantucket bill is it's thresholded at $2 million. So the first $2 million of a home sale is exempt from any transfer fee, and it's a 0.5% over $2 million. So you can't really get more modest than that in terms of a transfer fee.
Skipper, you had something you wanted to ask?
If it wasn't so serious, it's almost funny the way you described it. But following up on what Arthur said, I think we are in a crisis mode. We have all sorts of organizations that need people to support, plus teachers and paramedics that commute to come over here, and the whole list of nurses and doctors and professionals. It's a crisis, and we passed, about 10 years ago, the Community Preservation Act, and the spearhead of that was to get more funding for affordable housing, which worked, but we just can't keep up. It's just not enough. There needs to be a funding source, and when you hear the pushback from real estate. Same thing with the beverages industry did with the bottle bill years ago. The latest one you just had dealing with up there, and increasing the recycling of the beverage deposit bottle, which. And this certainly, both the land banks have been around a long time, and they certainly haven't hurt the real estate market in those two communities. They have not hurt the real estate or declined the price. That was the big thing. Well, it's going to increase the prices. No one's going to. That hasn't been an issue. It's been proven by the price increases in real estate and the transaction fees. And I certainly feel that is the only thing that's going to save us here, is we just can't keep up. We're losing, the prices are going up, there's no way, we just can't keep up. We've done a lot of the people in the Housing Authority are here in a lot of different angles, and people are doing as much as they can. They've amended zoning to making accessory apartments and all sorts of things. I'm sure you're doing in your own communities, but we just can't keep up. And I can't see why, and I think getting a home rule petition passed by the 6 towns that has the identical language, I don't think that would be that difficult. But you mentioning about facilitating some discussion along that lines, so we can mold it appropriately, which you guys can carry to the finish line, at least getting to the starting gate. But I think, and I'm not saying this is the right thing to do, but I've heard more than one person say, well, if we reduce the land bank fee from 2% to 1.5%, with the housing bank getting the other half, then truly you haven't increased the amount of money. I mean, the land bank.
Is that something that, I mean, I'm not we're not islanders.
No, but-
And that would be something that is
I'm sure the land bank's probably dead set against it, but there's got to be a balance between the two. I mean, I'm just thinking to have a balance between the two, and you got to have we need land preserved as well as we need housing for people living to take care of the land we're preserving.
So a couple of things. First, there's no rational argument that anyone can make against the Nantucket Home Rule petition. Like, I get it, right? We get it. There's no rational argument you can make against what Nantucket's trying to do in terms of a transfer fee on the housing, for a housing bank. We just want to work, and look, the bill is currently in third reading. It's the last step. I'd already put it through 2 committees. It's the last step before it gets passed. We've had meetings with Nantucketers, with the chairman, and a private meeting with the speaker about the bill. We've done, and I won't even get into the hours and various prominent people we've had reach out about this legislation. If after all of this, it's still hitting a roadblock, I think, a part of me wants to just keep filing it and kind of advocating for it and fighting it. But the folks on Nantucket may end up going back to the drawing board to think of another idea. Maybe that's a sliver off of Nantucket's land bank to support affordable housing. That's certainly something that they've talked about on Nantucket. But again, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go to Nantucket and say, hey, Nantucketers, we're going to take a percentage away from this thing that you guys love and it's done amazing work preserving land on island, and we're just going to do it because we think it's going to be helpful for your housing crisis. They got to come to us just like you guys have to come to us and say, here's what we built consensus around, here's what we want, and then we'll say, and it would be great to have a few different options, and so we can look at them and say, these are the ones that we think have a chance of making it at the State House. And then we can kind of work together on molding the best plan, and maybe it is through 6 home rules, maybe it's through just a countywide legislation. But either way, we need a menu of options from the local community saying these are the things that we think will help mitigate this crisis, and then we can work together, but we need a starting point, and we just haven't had any kind of starting point. No one's come to us and say, hey, after passing those non-binding resolutions and said, hey, this is what we think could work. So because no one's come to us, we've decided to start, we've decided to put together something, hopefully sometime in May, maybe early June, some sort of kind of housing forum for Islanders to come together and say, come together with some menu of options, some potential solutions, and hopefully we can work together on developing something that's palatable at the State House.
And I should just say that people have come to us with some solutions, but there's competing solutions,
right,
or competing groups, and so that for us is just, you look at that and say, all right, well, that's not gonna, anything we file, if there isn't sort of some consensus on this, and it's just gonna be impossible to get passed. It's already a heavy lift for us to do it, but we really need to get a united front from these communities to then go kind of wage that fight, and also have that menu of options of saying, all right, well, if we can't go here, can we do this? There's a negotiation to this, and I think both of us feel ill-equipped to do that at this point. Just to elaborate on.
So Larry, you had a question?
Well,
And then I'm going to take Philippe on this topic, and then I'm going to ask if there are any other questions on other topics.
I attended a housing group 4 or 5 months ago. I don't remember if Gail was there or not, but one of the topics was taking the land bank and slicing a little bit off, just what Skipper said. Since this is our legislation, we created the land bank. Why can't we change our own land bank legislation and then have to explain to the other legislatures who live in Western Mass why we want to do this, and they don't think it's a good idea?
Well, so we didn't, but the state created the land bank, actually.
State created, but yeah,
It was an act of the legislature.
My understanding, it was a nightmare. And what happened is, and a lot of people are saying that, and the land bank will tell you, is that it's like opening a can of worms. It was a long, hard battle to get it. And people are fearful if we open it up again, it may be attacked. So it's better to
and you
leave it
can't
alone.
change, so that's why, and we can talk about this. Home rule petitions can't be changed at the state level. You have to, if you file a home rule petition and it passes, and you bring it up to the State House, the legislators on Beacon Hill can't change a home rule petition without the town's approval of that change. So, we could think of, if that's something you guys are nervous about, we could think of creative solutions. It's personally not something that I'm nervous about in terms of folks changing legislation that Julian and I filed just because a far out place doesn't like it. But we could come up with different iterations that make it so that it can't be changed at Beacon Hill. That's
Because, well, the explanation was, if it comes from here and it gets into a committee, then we lose control
so
over
home rule,
how it's
but home rule
changed. So
petitions
that's
you
not home
cannot. Depends what it is, right?
Okay.
Home rule petitions, which you guys are all familiar with, because I'm sure you've all filed one at some point, cannot be changed at Beacon Hill unless they call back to you guys, whatever town filed it, and say, hey, can we make these changes? That's how home rule petitions work. That's something that we've suggested. The other way that you could change it on Beacon Hill is through regional legislation. So if it's filed regionally, that's not considered a home rule because it would be 6 towns instead of 1. That legislation, other legislators could change. I would be very surprised if legislators from other places in the state change things that Julian or I filed. But if that's a concern, we could look into the home rule.
Yeah,
piece.
we wouldn't pass it, right? We wouldn't allow it to be enacted. I think the other piece that you bring up, Gail, too, is there's a whole history here around how that was created. I don't know that history. And I think Dylan doesn't know it either because we weren't around. And so I think we need, we probably, so I think because this is actually to the wastewater piece, right, this has been, 10 years of work on Cape Cod, a whole year of work that we've been putting in, across the delegation, with the Cape Cod Chamber, a whole host of things, right? That it really is going to take, I think, for us, a little bit of an iterative and discussion-based process to figure out how we can be sort of best armed to go, to really go meet the desires and the real need and the real dire need that we have here in these communities. And so I think that's kind of the suggestion of the forum piece as well, is, yes, let's get a lot of ideas and consensus out there, but also help educate us, because we've got to become the experts on this to go get something done for you.
So I'm going to allow Philippe you want a question about this, Philippe? And then I want to ask if there are other topics that you want our representative and senator to talk about. Philippe?
Just briefly, I think your suggestion is a good one, to bring together people. And I think especially it sounds like the Realtor Association, because there actually was legislation introduced over 10 years ago, and there was consensus in terms of what the island wanted. That was not acceptable to the legislators. So I think that is the point of departure. And determining at what point and how we can come up with something that can be acceptable to the lobbyists and the legislators is really the question. Because what Art said is true. I mean, there was a lot of hard work that your predecessors put into trying to lobby for this legislation. It was 1% in addition to the land bank. And the land bank has since come and said that they would help administer the funds. So I mean, the infrastructure is there. The willingness, and I think that I would say the consensus as well, is there. It's really a question of what the legislature is going to pass.
Okay, good. Thank you.
One
Yeah,
more
Art,
thing on
absolutely.
what- okay, so just add one thing to that. I think you'd find on the Vineyard that you have almost universal support from the real estate community backing something like this. So the idea that these off-island real estate people don't want it, they need to hear from the real estate people here that, hey, we're part of your group and you're raining in our parade. So maybe that has to be part of it. But
I mean, that's,
Yeah.
the head of the Realtor board on Nantucket came to the state with House with me twice. Along with and we've sent letters from Nantucket Realtors Association.
They were in support.
In support of it, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Gail?
Sort of getting away from that. But is there any talk on the Hill about controlling Airbnbs or discouraging Airbnbs, because it's hurting all communities? And that's one of the reasons that these rentals are going up. We've got off-island developers that are coming, that are putting up a main house and an accessory house and basically renting both of them. It's killing us. So, I mean, that's another way to attack it. So is there any talk about that?
Yes, there's a lot of talk about that, especially in the House. How the Senate has looked at this has just said, you know, we're just going to apply the same sort of law and legal framework around what we apply to motels, hotels, just Airbnbs, rentals, just everything. It's one night, up to 30 days, and that's what it is. In the House, Representative Aaron Michaelowicz, who represents the North End,
Hates Airbnbs.
well, what's happening in the North End? Well, you know, you have a brownstone that used to be 4 or 5 apartments, and now that's bought by a developer, and it becomes, you know, Airbnb. You know, so just all these kind of questions and concerns, you know, for the community. Representative Michaelowicz's bill, which has been executed out of committee, has a whole series of tiers that, depending on the nature of the owner, right? Is it owner occupied? Is it a development property? That they'd be taxed at different levels.
How many days?
How many days? It's a bit of a, operationally and logistically, it's a bit of a headache. It also requires pretty significant oversight from local boards of health from an inspectional perspective. As someone who worked for the Department of Public Health for 6 years, I know how taxed your boards of health are, and so I'm a little skeptical that they can do that. What I think you're going to see is the House pass something that is actually a higher, more regulatory, and the Senate pass something that's less regulatory, which is actually an interesting switch for us. Usually, the Senate's the one that wants to regulate everything. And so I think that'll go to a compromise, and I think you'll have something that comes out in the middle, but there is a real concern about how do you stem the sort of speculation that problem we talked about.
I hear that some towns are beginning to zone them out. They're considering them commercial. So some of these accessory structures that actually don't have owner occupation, they've denied because they're in residential areas and the courts have upheld it. So that's something that our zoning, you know,
In the House bill.
it doesn't even need zoning reform. It's just an interpretation of it that town should be aware of.
In the House bill, essentially for all of the short-term rentals on the Vineyard, the tier you would fit into, the tax rate for short-term rentals is 18%. It's 10 to the state and up to 8 local. And so that is, you know, that is certainly discouraging Airbnbs. I don't think that'll be the final language in the bill. And I think that's going to be hammered out in a compromise committee. But, you know, to Julian's point, the House side does not, they don't look at it as leveling the playing field. They look at Airbnbs having destroyed, a lot of neighborhoods having destroyed, you know, you could say destroyed the rental stock on the Vineyard. You know, talk about a Vineyard shuffle. These, you know, in the past 10 years, and looking at like Kaylee and other people my age who have to do the Vineyard shuffle every year, and they just cannot find a single thing in the summertime anymore.
And people don't have to rent in the winter because they make all this money.
Exactly.
So it's
Exactly.
just a double whammy.
Exactly, and so we'll see what happens in the final compromise legislation, but you know, I think you are going to see some form of discouragement, but you know, it's just TBD on that, and we can give you more information as it comes.
So I'm going to shift gears for a minute. I have 2 questions for bills that I'd like to ask, and one is, so in Tisbury, just in hedging our bet, we filed a home rule, we're filing at town meeting, a home rule petition concerning pesticide and herbicide spraying, which would give our Board of Health the ability to decide whether, you know, we're not banning anything, we're giving our Board of Health the ability to make that decision. So I guess the question is, we're just hedging our bet, and I wasn't optimistic when I went to the meeting up at the State House because there's a big lobby of industry people. But could you speak a little bit about that? And then I have one other bill I'd like to ask about.
Yeah, okay, so pesticides, you know, a big concern across the Cape and Islands, sole source aquifer in every single county, Nantucket, Dukes. Barnstable. And so, this is obviously a really big concern for Julian and myself in terms of how do we kind of allow local communities to restrict pesticide use and protect our really delicate environments. So I guess the short story is a bill did make it out of committee that allows local communities, I believe, to restrict spraying on kind of right-of-ways. And that actually was filed by a Republican in the Senate. Is it Tarr?
Senator Tarr is the minority leader.
Yeah.
So there was a number of bills. I filed 2 bills, one related to pesticide management, another actually that would basically strengthen the teeth. If you look at how the pesticide board is configured, it's under the Department of Agricultural Resources, but the Department of Public Health has 2 seats, DEP has seats, and the bill that I filed basically said, look, if you're looking at analysis of pesticide use and herbicides in an area that's a sole source aquifer, you got to get the DPH and DEP to concur with the decision, right? So it's a much higher level of, and actually an agency that has actually has expertise in toxicology and these sort of exposure issues. There was the veg management bill, there was the bill you filed, which was basically just like, a scorched earth policy.
So actually, I mean, my bill's actually gotten a ton of attention, which has been great. And I filed it halfway through the session. So it was a late filed bill. It needs to be tweaked. We're working with the committee to tweak some changes, but essentially it ends state preemption for pesticide use and allows local communities to decide what pesticides are being sprayed on their lawns, estuaries, aquifers, and the like. Maine has similar legislation. Vermont has similar legislation already in place. This is a bill that's got a ton of attention in a very short period of time. The Sierra Club has it as their lead kind of pesticide bill that they're advocating for.
Is it still in committee?
It's still in committee because we need to work out a couple changes.
Yeah.
And so, and then also I've had selectmen from across the state reach out and say, hey, like, this is a great idea. Like we want that control in our local community. So it's a late file. We need to tweak some portions of the language, which I won't get into here. But it's something to keep an eye on. And then the bill we're going to be working on that, but the bill that we're going to be focusing on is the TAR bill because it made it out of committee section successfully.
We're hedging our bets, and what's the...
Yeah. Have you connected with some of the Cape-based advocates?
Yeah, in fact, we attended,
Okay.
our health inspector, Maura Valley, and myself attended the sandwich hearing of the MDAR. And by the way, they'll accept written testimony till the end of March, in case anybody's interested. The other question I had was on, and I know it's complex, so, and I see good and bad personally, but according to the Senate President, that when I was meeting the other day, there will be some kind of zoning bill coming out this year. And so I guess I'm just asking your guys' take on this. I am a little concerned about the developer as of right components that might be in there. But there are a lot of other things, including an option where it would be 4/5, you don't need the 2/3, on certain things for zoning. But anyway, I just was interested in your guys' take on that and the likelihood that you feel that something will be coming out this year.
So this is a major priority for both House members and Senate members. The Senate actually passed zoning reform last year. Actually, my predecessor took the lead on passing that. The challenge with what we passed then was that it got really distorted in sort of a too much development with not enough zoning reform and conservation and protection. So there's been a number of bills that have been filed on this. They have gone to 3 committees. I chair one of those committees that has oversight over this, the Community Development and Small Business Committee. And so right now, there's working groups in both the House and the Senate. The Senate is deferring to the House and letting the House go first. They don't like it when we go first. So we want this to get done. So we're kind of keeping our powder dry, holding back, and there's a working group that consists of 5 members in the House. Representative Sarah Peak sits on that working group. That bill was actually just moved favorably to the next stage in a committee. The other helpful factor here is the governor basically took all the sort of like ideas that everyone could agree on, which largely related to housing production, and put that in a bill that he's filed. And so that is sort of the vehicle where we're looking to attach more of the zoning related aspects. In the Senate side, there's a working group of 4 members on this. The Senate President, my colleague Joe Boncory from Winthrop, and then my colleague Linda Christina Forey, who left the Senate, and me. So now there's 3 of us. So I've got a pretty big say in this piece, and I'm working on it. The part that I'm having my staff look at as well is that how do we really broaden, when we look at housing production and zoning reform needs, especially for our communities, yes, we have a capital A affordable housing mechanism under 40B. Unlikely that's gonna be touched. But for our communities, we really have a need of housing for people who make 80% to 150, 160, 170% of area median income. There just really is a really limited toolbox for municipalities on that. And so one thing I really want to get done in this bill is, is making sure that we're looking at housing production and zoning reform and how that's going to impact and make a difference within smaller communities that really frankly don't have the scale. There's a big push in this that a big push of this is going to be about transit-oriented development, that it's not geared towards our communities. And so I think I want to make sure to fight that. But I'm optimistic that we're going to do something. The question really is how much more expansive is it than what the governor filed? I think what the governor filed is decent and is good. I don't know how much it would actually make a real difference for communities here on Island and the communities I represent.
One question from the audience. Somebody asked for any other. Go ahead.
The mechanics of the bill in front of you, I missed that part of the other session of Bluff's present, the beginning part. But the mechanics of that, if we were to get some monies to do sewering or work with alternative septic systems, how would this mechanically work to get us that?
So mechanically, it's layered on. There's an existing program under the State Revolving Loan Fund program, which I think Down Island communities may be familiar with. It's a scoring-based system, so it was designed to really take out political influence, all sorts of factors, right? Really just basing it on a whole host of sort of metrics on scoring to prioritize funding. So the idea is that this additive fund would use that scoring system with some additional criteria that was regional specific. It would go before, so there'd be a score, it would go before the management board that's comprised of representatives from every single town to ensure equal distribution. In an earlier iteration of this bill, we actually wrote language that said, look, every town gets, you put $1 in, you get $1 back. From a legal perspective, that essentially is, it's like writing a Ponzi scheme in law. So we couldn't do that. So we've set up the board that basically establishes standards around equal distribution, and then those monies then are then, the mechanics are distributed to the town, and they're able to, it's actually through loans and borrowing. So the idea really is not to create a new bureaucracy, not to create like an MWRA for the islands and the Cape, to use the existing sort of lean, pretty efficient version. My understanding with SRF is it's, as far as bureaucratic requirements go, it is not the most overt. I mean, these are complicated projects, but it's manageable. And it's something that I think is really intended to be additive and relatively easy for the communities. Each community has a voice in this, and also the Martha's Vineyard Commission and the Cape Cod Commission and the Nantucket County also serve ex officio. So that's how functionally it would work.
So the mechanics of the money would be in the general fund for the state? Or
no, the mechanics of the money would be through the SRF. And basically through a zero interest loan, through loans, through bonding. So it's separate from general fund appropriations.
And also, this isn't take away from money the town would be getting otherwise, right? It's the 2.75 on top. So if you don't opt in, you don't get any of that money to begin with. The sense I've been trying to get from island folks is, one, want to make sure there's a heads up that this is coming and we've been working on this. Two, get feedback around
in the actual language, are there things that we need to do to sort of tweak things, make it more palatable, make it more helpful? And then 3, just get a temperature check. You know, is this something that you folks think is helpful? You know, you essentially have, for island communities, you basically have an opt-in because you've got to work with DEP to sort of meet this 208 criteria, which my understanding is isn't too onerous, and then there's an opt-out, so I don't feel like we're sort of shoving it down anyone's throats. But that temperature check is something that we've been wanting to make sure that we just get from folks, so that we don't do anything that is least harmful, that it's at least it's something that's in another tool for communities.
And you already know my comments.
And they've been very helpful.
The proportional share, the 208, I still have a problem with. I don't,
Yep.
because it's always onerous to get anything by DEP.
I know.
So I don't know why you just can't put language that says, or something comparable, or something specific, you know, 208 plan or something comparable, or TWMP, a total wastewater management plan, because that's
Yep.
what we're doing, and that's what we're spending money on. And so it's, to add something, another plan to be approved by DEP is just another additional layer.
The language we've used is, in defining what a 208 plan is, shall mean an area-wide water quality management plan or a suitable equivalent. So that suitable equivalent, look at that and we can talk about if that
TWMP
needs
will
to
qualify
be.
for that.
Yep,
This is probably a stupid question. as
No.
usual, But, so you have the 2.7%.
yep.
Is that 2.7% or nothing, or can a community do 1.5%? I mean, you know, in other words, is it all or nothing?
So it's all or nothing, and if the community opts out, there's no 2.75%. So it doesn't exist. Yeah, so it's all
What
or
are they
nothing.
asking?
Yeah.
And if you join, there's language in there, so if you don't, if you opt out, and then kind of 5 years down the road, Tisbury has some huge sewering costs and wants to opt in, there is kind of a wait time penalty before you get any funds back.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Any other questions from the board on this, or any other issue?
Just
Mr. Coogan?
more an observation than anything else. Just from listening to you guys about the housing bank, and this is more directed at everybody at the table there, I think what they tried to say at least 10 times is that if we don't get together and make a decision on how we want that housing bank, how we want it appropriated, they're not willing to pick up the ball and run, and I think they said that enough. So the onus is on us. I think we need an agenda item, possibly the next time we meet, even if that's the only thing on the agenda, so that we can come up with one voice and then give it to them, and whether it runs or not, I mean, the fact that outside forces are affecting us, what a surprise. That pretty much, we're owned by that, just by the smallness of our community. And the other thing I'd like to mention, particularly to all the people in the room, how brilliant we were in electing these two.
And unlike me, they're under the age of 90, so which is very encouraging.
Can I just add something to what Greg said, so we can be really specific? Can you just give us all of the different things that have to be addressed when that meeting happens for the housing bank? Like, what do you need covered, so we don't go off track? And if you can even just write 4 themes, so we can hasten the process.
Joe
And I
Mark
think,
and Quinn are here as well.
We're still working on, and I think we're still working on hammering out the details of when and where, but we hope kind of late May, early June, to have something on the books and then do some sort of campaign around promoting it for people to come, and we'll have, you know, I think we're trying to get, Kaylee actually wrote a proposal to get kind of maybe the United Way and the realtors and other groups involved to help facilitate as well.
So if you want to use this venue too,
Yep.
I think we'd all be, more than happy to help. And the other, this just as a sidebar, if the Nantucket thing doesn't
And we'll
fly,
see. We'll see. I'm cautious.
can we also maybe
Cautious
dovetail,
optimistic.
or at least maybe have a discussion with them, the
Yep.
strength in numbers, and maybe a thought would be to talk with them too and see if there's any commonality.
I think that's, terrific, and something I think we've been trying to do in saying, and as I look at the towns that I represent, and I'm sort of like, all right, Truro, sometimes talking to Orleans is a little weird, but, Truro and Shellmark are kind of very much dealing with some of the same challenges, OB and Orleans, and so however we can kind of make those connections and synergies. From a timeline perspective, just to give a sense on this, so the legislative session, we have about 4.5 months left. We're gonna, formal sessions end July 31st. So this, I think the goal would be to have something that could be filed in 2019, either if we're re-elected or if others are in our shoes. Hopefully we'll have the honor to continue that. I think too, we'll also have feedback on this Nantucket Housing Bank. Dylan has been, so when I saw this, I was like, there's no way in hell this is happening. And Dylan has been brilliant in moving this so much further in the House than I even thought possible. So we actually may be able to get this done. But I think from a timing perspective, if we could, and if there needs to be something that goes to towns, and maybe that's a fall town meeting piece, and then, so we're set up for the new session in January 2019, that we have something that we can say, look, the island communities have been working on this. Here's what we want to do, and then we can really hit the ground running to get that done.
Well, many years ago, we copied Nantucket's land bank bill to have the land bank bill we did now. Would it be helpful if our particular home rule petitions were similar to what Nantucket was, so when you go to file them together, they would at least read identical, would might help? Maybe the percentages might be different, but the mechanism.
I mean, if Nantucket passes, then yes, because Nantucket passed, right, and then you guys copied it.
Obviously, their language hasn't been successful so far, but at least if you could see that, it would give us a starting point to look at.
Yeah.
And they've obviously probably already discussed a lot of the things we would be discussing, which I said,
And there's an example too of language. So Provincetown has done something similar, but they have not used a transfer fee. They've actually used direct town appropriations, and we can share that model. That's actually was passed because there was less objection to that. So we'll look to find examples of things to start sending that way and having that conversation.
Maybe the commission can help us coordinate this as well. Are any other questions from the board for our senator or state rep? Number one, Dylan?
I just want to say, I represent, Falmouth, the Vineyard, Nantucket. I'm right in Woods Hole, so I walk to the boat, and it's pretty easy for me to come see you guys. But Julian represents 24 towns and lives all the way, I don't even, way in the park, in the outermost house.
someplace called Truro.
Yeah, and he's been on island more times than I can count this past year. He's here last week, he's here again. And I just think that speaks volumes to our state senator to be so present in our local island communities, and just want to thank him for making the trek so often.
And I also want to give a shout out to our island representative, to you guys, Kaylee Moore.
Yeah,
who's
this is
been
awesome.
Doing a great job. So, I have no more questions. Yeah, absolutely. So, I don't want to have him mad at me, so I'm going to allow one question from my friend, Mr. Ruskin, who I saw. You're all set?
Got covered.
Okay, we got covered. So we want to thank you, and hope maybe we'll do it again in the fall, and really appreciate your coming over. And just as an aside to everybody, I know Oak Bluffs and Tisbury are planning to attend the Cape and Island Selectmen's meeting in Falmouth tomorrow. I might have a seat or two left in our town vehicle. We're taking the 7 o'clock boat, and it's at the Seacrest in Falmouth, and we've been trying to strengthen our ties with the Cape so that we can have a better exchange of ideas and commonality where we can find it. I think it's really been of value. So thank you very much, and I'm going to move right